Evening. You mind telling me why you were pulled over back there?
I figured the tag light was out. That's what you said on the speaker.
That's right. License still in the car?
Yeah, it's in the wallet.
All
Door
right.
pocket.
Just stay where you are for me.
What happens when a patrol officer decides a calm black man looks suspicious? Not because he's breaking the law, but because he's sitting alone in his car with a coffee. What happens when that officer keeps pushing, keeps escalating, even after learning exactly who that man is? This didn't end with an apology. It didn't end with my mistake. And it didn't end quietly. Because this officer didn't just overstep his authority, he recorded it. Every question, every command, every choice. And once the cameras were rolling, there was no way to rewrite what happened next. Before we rewind, quick check-in. Where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. And if you like stories where someone tries a power move and the footage forces real consequences, hit like and subscribe. You'll want the next part. Now rewind. Briar Ridge Police Department had been trying to look professional lately. New public statements. New training reminders. New promises about respect and accountability. The public heard it and rolled their eyes. Inside the department, some officers treated it like noise. Internal Affairs didn't. Because on an ordinary evening, in an ordinary parking lot, one officer was about to turn a normal moment into a career-ending record. And he had no idea who was sitting in that driver's seat. Briar Ridge Police Department had a reputation problem. Not the kind that shows up in one viral clip, but the quieter kind that builds over years. Complaints that went nowhere. Stops that looked justified on paper and questionable on video. So the department went into repair mode. New policies. New language about professionalism. Supervisors reminding officers that the public was watching. Internal Affairs wasn't watching for optics. They were watching for patterns. Deputy Chief Malcolm Brooks ran Internal Affairs. Mid-40s. Calm. Deliberate. He wasn't the kind of leader who gave speeches about reform. He didn't posture. He didn't threaten. He worked the way systems actually change through documentation, timelines, and evidence that couldn't be argued away. Brooks believed in one thing more than anything else if you line up the footage with the policy. The truth speaks for itself. That night, he wasn't conducting an investigation. He wasn't setting a trap. He wasn't testing anyone. He was off duty in the practical way high-ranking officers are off duty. Phone still active. Mind still half on the job. He picked up a coffee and pulled into a gas station lot to sit for a few minutes. No violation. No urgency. No reason for attention. Which is exactly why what happened next mattered. Because abuse of power doesn't usually start during emergencies. It starts when someone decides they can. The gas station lot was quiet. Not empty. Just unremarkable. A couple of cars near the pumps. The hum of traffic in the distance. Nothing that called for police attention. Malcolm Brooks sat in his sedan with a coffee resting in the cup holder. Engine off. Seatbelt still on. Phone in his hand as he scrolled through messages. This was not a crime. It wasn't even unusual. But across the lot, Officer Nolan Consincade noticed the car and decided it didn't belong. There was no call for service. No bolo. No report of suspicious activity. Just a decision. Consincade pulled in behind the sedan and hit the spotlight. White light flooded the rearview mirror. He didn't start with a greeting. He didn't ask if everything was okay. He went straight to authority. "What are you doing here? Why are you sitting in this lot?" The tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory. Brooks looked in the mirror, took a breath, and stayed still, hands visible, posture relaxed. He answered calmly and asked one question in return. "What's the reason for the contact?" "Officer." It was a fair question, a professional one. Consincade didn't answer it. Instead, he shifted his stance closer to the door, angled toward the window, positioned like he was already preparing for resistance. He said the car looked suspicious. He implied Brooks was being difficult for asking questions. This was the first moment the stop could have ended. A simple explanation. A professional reset. Everyone moves on. Kincaid chose not to take it, because to him, the problem wasn't the car. It was the man inside it, calm, composed, and not responding to pressure the way he expected. And that's where normal stops start turning into something else. Officer Nolan Kincaid had been on patrol long enough to know how these encounters usually went. Pressure first, confusion second, compliance follows. Most people respond to a spotlight and a uniform the same way. They get nervous. They rush to explain. They give more information than they should. Brooks didn't, and that disrupted the script. Kincaid asked for identification not as a request, as a test. Brooks complied without hesitation. Slow movement. Hands visible. No attitude. Then he asked again, calmly, for the reason he was being stopped. That question landed wrong. To Kincaid, questions weren't neutral. They were challenges. He stepped closer to the door, shifted his weight, raised his voice just enough to establish dominance. Not clarity. He said Brooks was being uncooperative. He said the situation didn't feel right. None of that is a law. None of it explains a stop. But it's the kind of language that shows up later in reports. Brooks noticed something else. Kincaid wasn't positioning for safety. He was positioning for narrative, angling his body toward the window, turning slightly away from his own camera, creating a record that could be interpreted, not understood. Brooks made one quiet adjustment. He stated clearly that the interaction was being recorded beyond just the body cam. Dash cam. Gas station cameras. A professional officer hears that and recalibrates. Kincaid stiffened. He didn't slow down. He escalated. Because for officers who rely on pressure, being observed doesn't create caution. It creates resentment. And now this stop was no longer about a parked car. It was about whether control came from the badge or from the rules that badge was supposed to follow. At this point, the stop could still have ended cleanly. Kincaid could have explained the contact, run the ID, and walked away. No complaint. No report. No problem. Brooks gave him every chance to do exactly that. He kept his voice level. He didn't lecture. He didn't invoke rank. He simply asked for clarity. What's the specific reason for this stop? Am I being detained? Or am I free to go? Those questions aren't confrontational. They're procedural. Kincaid treated them like defiance. His tone sharpened. He started circling the car. Slow and deliberate. As if movement itself could create justification. He implied Brooks was stalling, that he was making this harder than it needed to be. That's how pressure works. Frame calm as obstruction, and obstruction as cause. Brooks noticed something else shifting. Kincaid wasn't searching for a violation anymore. He was searching for submission. So Brooks made the smallest move possible to reset the encounter. He identified himself. Not loudly, not dramatically. Name, badge, title. Deputy Chief Malcolm Brooks. Internal Affairs. The words landed and hung in the air. There was a pause. You can hear Kincaid processing it, the calculation. The sudden awareness that this wasn't a random driver. This was the moment that defined everything that followed. Because now, the officer knew exactly who he was dealing with. And everything he chose to do after that would be on purpose. The pause didn't soften him. It hardened him. Kincaid looked at Malcolm Brooks like Brooks had personally challenged his authority, not by arguing, but by existing in that seat. He didn't apologize. He didn't step back. He didn't reset the stop. He escalated. "The stop isn't over," he said. "Step out of the vehicle." The command wasn't tied to a reason. It wasn't explained. It was framed like Brooks was delaying on purpose, like asking for a lawful basis was the problem. Brooks stayed exactly where he was, hands visible, voice calm. He said he would comply with lawful orders and asked, again, for the legal reason to be stated clearly on camera. That sentence mattered. It gave Kincaid a clean exit. Say the reason. End the stop. Kincaid ignored it. Instead, his tone shifted from authoritative to contemptuous. He started talking about internal affairs not as a department, but as an enemy. He mocked the idea of oversight, dismissed it as desk work, made it personal. Like Brooks hadn't earned his position. None of that had anything to do with a parked car. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't uncertainty. This was retaliation in real time. And the cameras were capturing every word. Once Kincaid crossed that line, he needed justification. Not for the moment, for the record. He started fishing. He said he needed to check the vehicle. Implied there were reasons. Never stated them. He leaned toward the window like he was looking for something that wasn't there. Asked questions that weren't connected to any violation. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Who are you meeting? Why are you parked here? Why this part of the city? None of it added up to probable cause. But it created noise. Noise is useful when facts are thin. Brooks didn't take the bait. He didn't fill the silence. Didn't offer a story that could be twisted later. He stayed focused on process. Am I being detained or am I free to go? What specific law am I suspected of violating? Kincaid didn't answer. Instead, he repositioned again, half a step back. Then sideways until his body partially blocked the cleanest angle of his own camera. Then he raised his voice. Not to communicate, to dominate. He started using labels out loud. Non-compliant, evasive, hostile. Brooks hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved, hadn't threatened anything. But labels don't describe behavior. They justify outcomes. Brooks challenged the foundation, not the language. He asked Kincaid to repeat on camera what order he was giving and what law it was tied to. That's when Kincaid made the next dangerous choice. He reached for his radio. Kincaid keyed up his radio. This wasn't a request for transparency. It was a setup. He didn't say, "I have a department supervisor here and need another unit for clarity." He said the kind of words that change how officers arrive. Suspicious vehicle. Driver refusing commands. Need backup. Those phrases matter. They preload the moment. By the time another cruiser turns into the lot, the decision-making window is already narrowed. Brooks heard the call and didn't react. No sudden movements. No protests. He did something quieter. He adjusted his phone so the audio would be clean. Not to go viral. To preserve the record. Kincaid noticed, and it irritated him. He leaned back toward the window and repeated the same command. Louder. Step out of the vehicle. Still no reason. Still no articulation. Headlights appeared at the edge of the lot. Another unit coming in hot. Kincaid straightened up like he was about to perform. This was the dangerous part of stops like this when ego meets an audience. Because once more, officers arrive. What happens next isn't just about law. It's about which version of the story gets believed first. And Kincaid was determined to tell his side. The second unit rolled into the lot fast. Tires slowed hard. Doors opened quickly. Kincaid stepped into it like he'd been waiting for an audience. He started talking before anyone was close enough to see the driver clearly, framing it immediately. Drivers refusing orders, making it unsafe, Won't step out. Narrative first. Facts later. Sergeant Mateo Alvarez stepped out of the cruiser and did a quick scan. Cruiser placement. Body language. Hands. Distance. Then his eyes landed on the man in the driver's seat. He recognized Malcolm Brooks instantly. Alvarez didn't show panic, but his posture changed. This wasn't a routine stop. This was a career moment. Officer Tessa Reed, the rookie, followed Alvarez's gaze. She recognized Brooks from briefings and department emails. Her body language shifted. 2. Kincaid kept going. He told Alvarez loudly that Brooks was refusing to exit the vehicle, that he needed compliance. Alvarez didn't mirror the tone. He did the supervisor thing. He asked for the reason for the stop and the legal basis for the escalation. Clean questions, the kind that force facts or expose ego. Kincaid didn't give facts. He gave grievances. About oversight. About internal affairs. About how patrol officers were always second-guessed. That was the slip. Because the moment he made it about resentment instead of safety, the stop stopped being a stop. It became retaliation on camera. And Alvarez knew it. Alvarez didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He took control. He ordered Kincaid to step back and give space. Not a suggestion. A supervisor's order. For a split second, Kincaid hesitated. That pause mattered. Then he complied, but not quietly. He kept talking, still trying to label Brooks as difficult, still trying to preserve his version of events. Alvarez shut that down. He asked again slowly, clearly for the specific reason for the stop. Not it felt wrong, not suspicious. A law, a fact. Kincaid couldn't provide one. Brooks finally spoke directly to Alvarez. Calm, measured. He identified himself again as the head of internal affairs and stated plainly that he'd been sitting in the lot drinking coffee when the stop escalated without legal cause. Alvarez took one more look at Kincaid. The look supervisors give when they realize this is going to require command staff. He called for a lieutenant to respond immediately. Not later. On scene. He also instructed Officer Reed to remain present and observe. No wandering off. No side conversations. Witnesses locked in. Kincaid tried one last angle. He framed oversight as interference. Like leadership was handcuffing real policing. Brooks didn't respond to the speech. He didn't need to. Because at that moment, the stop wasn't being decided by ego anymore. It was being decided by record. And the record was already complete. The lieutenant arrived without urgency, which told you everything. This wasn't a crisis. It was a cleanup. He separated people immediately. Not to calm emotions, to preserve facts. He asked one question first. Not who was upset. Not who felt disrespected. What was the legal basis for the stop? Kincaid gave the same answer he'd been circling all night. Vague. Non-specific. Heavy on tone. Light on law. The lieutenant didn't debate it. He turned to Brooks and told him he was free to go. Just like that. No lecture. No commentary. That decision alone said enough. Then he turned back to the scene. He instructed Alvarez to stay and begin documentation. Full timeline. No summaries. No, we'll fix this later. He told Kincaid to stop talking and to keep his body camera on. That instruction matters. Because when a supervisor tells you to stop explaining, it means the explaining is hurting you. Kincaid tried to squeeze in one last narrative push. One last attempt to be validated. It didn't land. The lieutenant sent him back to the station, not to continue his shift, but to wait. Every officer knows what that means. Brooks drove out of the lot like any other driver. No victory lap. No words exchanged. The coffee was still untouched, because the point of that night was never the stop. It was the choices made after there was no excuse left. And those choices were already sealed on camera. Back at headquarters, the process moved quickly. Not because of politics, because the evidence left no room to stall. The first step was preservation. Body camera footage was locked. Dash cam secured. Radio traffic saved. Dispatch logs. Timestamps. Call history all frozen in place. They pulled the gas station surveillance too. Video doesn't care about tone or excuses. It shows what happened. Kincaid was placed on administrative leave by the next shift. Paid at first standard procedure. Not a judgment. A safeguard. Statements followed. Sergeant Alvarez wrote his that same night. Straight facts. No spin. Officer Reed wrote hers too. And that rookie report mattered more than most. Rookies don't have old loyalties yet. They write what they see. Kincaid's report came later. It read differently. Heavy on labels. Light on specifics. A narrative built to justify a conclusion. The interviews made the difference. When investigators lined up the footage with policy, a pattern appeared. Not a single bad moment, but a series of choices. He escalated without cause. He continued after learning who Brooks was. He ignored supervisory direction. He framed resistance that never happened. That's not confusion. That's intent. The disciplinary findings were clear. Harassment. Misuse of authority. Insubordination. Credibility failure. There was no quiet transfer. No demotion. No second chance. Kincaid was terminated. His badge was surrendered. The case forwarded to the State Certification Board. That step mattered. It closed the door on the usual exit, getting fired quietly and hired somewhere else. Briar Ridge didn't stop there. They tightened policy around suspicious vehicle contacts. Required clearer articulation. Expanded body camera audits tied to complaint categories. They backed supervisors who intervened early. No punishment for stopping a bad call. Malcolm Brooks went back to work. No speeches. No press conference. Just the next file. And Officer Reed went back to patrol with a lesson no academy class can teach. Authority without accountability is just bullying in uniform. Here's the truth this footage exposed. Cameras don't create misconduct. They remove the escape. Power doesn't reveal itself when things are easy. It reveals itself when someone hears no and decides to punish the person who said it. So now, the question's yours. If you were the supervisor walking into that lot, would you have checked your officer right there? Or would you have tried to smooth it over and handle it later? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more true stories where accountability actually lands and the footage forces consequences, like the video, share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe, because the next one is already waiting.